named scientist, explorer, and leader of over 50 scientific expeditions to polar and alpine regions of the world. He has received numerous honors, has over 300 scientific publications, and 2 books on climate change written for the public. I sat down with Dr. Majewski to discuss his research and thoughts on the future impacts of climate change.
Last few decades, I, along with my graduate students and many colleagues, have focused on the use of ice cores from all over the world. The Arctic, the Antarctic, Himalayas, Tibetan Plateau, the Andes, New Zealand. We focus on these records because they provide us a very, very robust view of past climate. They tell us about past temperature, precipitation, shifts in atmospheric circulation systems, increases and decreases in greenhouse gas levels, a variety of other pollutants, changes in the extent of sea ice, volcanic activity, forest fires. They're just a remarkable way of looking at the past climate system and actually also calibrating it to the modern climate system. Along with the teams that I've worked with and led, we've made probably 3 groupings of major discoveries in the climate system. The first was the identification that the climate system does not operate always in a slow linear way, that it can operate abruptly. In less than 10 years or in less than 2 years, you can have dramatic changes in temperature, precipitation, atmospheric circulation. The second big grouping is the impact of changes, natural changes in the climate system on past civilizations, leading very, very quickly to drought, increased levels of sea ice surrounding a region, both of which led to and contributed to, obviously, major changes in civilization in those regions. And the third, and perhaps most important, we provided the perspective that now allows us to understand that the climate system, the chemistry of the atmosphere in particular, is completely different than it has ever been in the past. Increased levels of greenhouse gases, but perhaps more importantly, rising faster than they ever have before, plus with a combination of increased levels of radionuclides, toxic metals, humanly engineered chemicals, and a whole variety of things that have never come together in the Earth system before to produce a climate similar to what we have today. If I had to sum up what I thought was the greatest climate change challenge for us right now and in the future, I'd use the word security. As the climate system changes, largely as a consequence of human activity, we will experience, and already do experience, dramatic impacts on human and ecosystem health. We are beginning to see increased frequency and magnitude of extreme events. We're seeing rise in sea level, which is going to become more and more apparent over the next few decades and centuries. And we're seeing tremendous differences in the distribution of water over the planet. As a consequence of climate change and increases in population, there are going to be regions of the world that are critically at risk as a consequence of drought. Society has a lot to think about for the future, and even right now there are big changes occurring already, and I think there are 2 big concepts that we need to really embrace. One of them is education. We need to understand much more as the public about what these changes are. Of course, warming is part of it. There is much more in addition to that warming and the impacts of that warming. The other thing that we need to think about carefully is what are the opportunities for the future? There are many things that we will not be happy about in the future, but there are opportunities. Building seawalls to the appropriate level rather than redoing them in 100 years. Looking for better ways to manage our economy and considering the fact that our economy in fact might be based on water in the future and not oil. I'd like to take this opportunity to provide the delegates and the policymakers with 2 messages. The first is, please do not underestimate the potential for climate change in the future. There may very well be significantly more than one would assume there could be based on the models. The second is, do not assume that the climate system over the next few decades and centuries will operate in a linear, gradual way. We know from the past that it could change very, very abruptly, and we need to have models and thinking in place that allows us to deal with both linear and abrupt changes.
Which mitigation strategies do you believe will see us through the inevitable climate change?
Mitigation is just one of the three-pronged efforts that's required. There's lots of questions about how climate is going to change that we're not in a position to answer yet. We need more research. And while we're quite confident about our future temperature projections, we're much less certain about how water on this planet is going to change. And arguably, the changes in climate associated with water, precipitation, evaporation, the water budget have a much more profound effect on society than temperature changes. And I don't think we appreciate that enough, that there's lots of questions. How are ecosystems going to respond to those changes in water availability? How is food production going to be affected by those changes in water availability? While mitigation is obviously important, we are not sure yet what lies ahead, because we haven't had an opportunity to actually address some of these very important points. And the other part of the three-prong approach is the adaptation to climate change. It's questionable, even if we have massive international cooperation in reducing CO2 emissions, that we're not going to be experiencing some pretty dramatic changes to our environment. And these things will have impacts on food, our energy supply, virtually all aspects of life, and they're going to cost billions of dollars to address. The time has arrived where, regardless of whether we're going to be successful at slowing down CO2 or not, if we hope that humanity will survive, we have to start looking for solutions and how we're going to cope, adapt to climate change that's coming ahead.
Are you hopeful for our future?
I think that the hope that I have for the future is that the youth will become engaged, recognize how much power they actually have in society, and start demanding that they be allowed to participate in the future of what's going to happen to this planet.
If you were to grade Canada's report card on climate change, what grade would you give it?
I don't hand out many D minuses, but I think that's about where it sits. There's still a modicum of financial support for climate-related research in Canada, but the government's been way too slow in recognizing the importance of continuing science and climate change. They've been dragging their feet on looking for adaptation strategies, pitifully slow. In fact, the private sector is way ahead of the government. And internationally, I think while the rest of the world used to look up to Canada for leadership, that we've abrogated our responsibilities and have joined the group of people who would sooner profit in the short term and mortgage the future. I think the delegation from Canada should try to convince that the other members from the rest of the world that as a society we are concerned about the environment. We are concerned about climate change. I'm concerned that we're being depicted as a society which only cares about their own self-interest, when in fact that is not the history of this country.
Hello, dear viewers. I'm called Changwenina, the youth climate reporter from Cameroon. I would like to have an interview with my resource person. Good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon, Nina. Have a seat.
Thank you. Can you please introduce yourself? Because I'm here to ask you some questions concerning climate change.
Okay.
In the community.
You're welcome. I'm Marvel Joyce from Youth Outreach Program, a community-based organization.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to know, what are some of the causes of climate change in your community?
Some of the causes of climate change in my community are sometimes, as you can see, my community is surrounded by a lot of trees, and our main occupation here in Bamenda is farming. So farmers do cut down these trees in order to have good farmland. As a result of felling down trees, we are faced with a lot of climate changes.
Okay, thank you very much. Have you or your organization ever carried out actions to overcome climate change?
Yes, of course. We have been carrying out many actions to overcome climate change around Bamenda 1.
If I can see, you have many pictures up here from your past projects.
Yes, as you are seeing, those are people from community schools. They are undergoing environmental protection by planting trees.
Okay, I can see a girl holding a seedling from a mango tree.
On that picture, you can see them holding the seedlings, still waiting for planting. On this one, you can see the young people actively involved in planting. And by planting more trees, I think we will be able to overcome this issue of climate change.
Thank you very much. So, dear viewers, the main causes of climate change here in Bamenda Kwe community is cutting down of trees. And as Martha Joyce has earlier said, she would like farmers to limit the action of cutting down the tree, or if you cut down one tree, you should make sure you plant 2 or 3. Thank you very much.
بالنسبة للتغير المناخي عادة يعني أصابع العمل الفردي ما بتظهر فيه، لكن التغير في الطقس أو الناتج من عمليات التصحر والجفاف والتصحر دي بعض الأحيان بتعتبر كما يقال يعني ماميد أو مصنوعة بأعمال الإنسان. لكن البروسيس الاثنين دي الأول بيدعموا بعضهم البعض. طبعا في سبب رئيسي وكبير جدا بيتكلموا عنه العلماء كثير، اللي هو طبقة تحت الأوزون الحامية للأرض، والإشعاعات اللي بتأثر تأثير مباشر على حياة البشر وعلى زراعتهم وعلى إنتاجهم، حياتهم في أجسادهم، حتى الجسد بيتأثر. وحتى الآن في ناس بيفتكروا أنه التغير المناخي إذا نحن ما خلينا بالنا ويعني دعمنا الاستخدام الأحسن والأفضل والأنظف في كل الموارد المتاحة لنا ونحن مستخلفين فيها من الله سبحانه وتعالى، نحن مع الكلام ده هيحصل في النهاية إنه نفقد كل هذه الموارد، تصبح الأرض ما عندها الإمكانيات عشان تستمر، فتنتهي الحياة بطريقة أو بأخرى. يعني القدريين قد يقول لك والله كل ما في يد الإنسان، لكن الإنسان عليه مسؤولية كبيرة جدا. وإذا كان أنت أو إذا كان بلد ما أصبحت تستخدم الموارد استخدام جائر، يمكن الإنتاج بتاعها يقل. فلما الإنتاج يقل من مثلا الغلة أو البذرة الطعام اللي بيستخدموه الناس، حيبتدي يضطر بدل مساحة صغيرة كانت بيجيب إنتاج كويس يمد يقطع زيادة. يعني الواحد كان يتمنى التغير المناخي يكون إيجابي، لكنه حتى الآن كله سالب. الحركة بتاعت الإنسان، يعني التحرك بتاع المجتمعات في السودان وفي غير السودان كان محدود، يعني لأنه الدستور والبلد غير مستقرة، كل مرة بتغير زعزعة. في كثير من الأحيان مجتمعات كمجتمعات على مسؤولية من الناحية دي. يعني إذا كان الناس بيحافظوا على موارد المياه مثلا، وهكذا هكذا هكذا. دي كلها أشياء الحكومة مستوجب عليها أنها تقيم القوانين التي تحمي وتقيم القوانين التي تراقب زيادة الإنتاجية في كل هذه سواء كان إنتاجية الحيوان أو المحاصيل تمشي في الاتجاه الأمثل بالنسبة لمواردك وبالنسبة لإمكانياتك وبالنسبة لاقتصادك.
My research focuses on the ecology of polar bears. I'm particularly interested in their foraging behavior and habitat use. So what we're seeing in southern Hudson Bay is potentially some precursors to population decline. That the body condition is declining. The numbers haven't reflected that yet, but given the trends in sea ice in Hudson Bay and throughout the Arctic, population declines in this region are probably unavoidable. And there's not enough said about the state of the planet. But having said that, it's not easy to get that message across in a way that affects meaningful change. Climate change is having indisputable, strong negative effects on northern wildlife. These effects are widespread and profound and are having profound effects on northern people that utilize and rely on wildlife resources. The policy decisions that need to be made will have strong benefits. It's not too late to at least stop and in some cases reverse the patterns of environmental decline that have negatively affected wildlife populations. And I urge you to make these decisions quickly and based on the best available evidence.
Hi, I'm Stephen Poon, graduating student of Green Business Management in Seneca College, and today I'll be interviewing Carmen Schlemm. She is the coordinator of Environmental Technician Sampling and Monitoring Center of the Built Environment for Seneca College. Thank you. And so, what will be the message that you'd like to then deliver to the delegates and the policymakers?
The message that I would like to deliver is to consider that you are not talking about saving the planet or saving the environment. We hear this term a lot being used. Really what we're talking about is saving ourselves. So if people don't have time to adjust to changes that are coming down, if they don't show some kind of adaptation or evolution in the way we think about ourselves as people, we're going to be in for a really rough ride ahead. If we're given the time to be resilient and act like nature does and have time to change, then that is what is the best way to go about it. So I would say give us time to change.
Right, thank you very much.
Can you tell us about, in your opinion, what is the greatest climate change crisis or environmental crisis facing the region and the world today?
Okay, let us start with the Sudan.
With Sudan, yes.
Sudan is one of those countries which is very prone to environmental changes, and our environment is very fragile, can be affected, and we have lots of threats and risks that are threatening our environment. Of course, we have Habub, we have floods, we have what we call the Haddam, the banks of the Nile, and the deforestation, desertification, and misuse of our resources. Projects in agriculture, usually in the Sudan here, they are involved with irrigation, and with irrigation and agriculture, we always have tropical diseases or waterborne diseases. And that's my background, that's my way of assessing this. Because malaria, bilharzia, they are water related, and wherever you have an irrigation project, within 2 or 3 years, you will have malaria problem and bilharzia. If you are not careful with what you are doing, they will be a bigger problem to solve. This is exactly what happened in مشروع الجزيرة, Kinana, Asalaya, whatever, you name it.
Every agricultural project.
Our projects should be environmentally friendly, should be very well controlled so that we reduce on the transmission of diseases, and we should have healthcare and facilities to supply clean water to the people in their houses. They are not to go and use canal water, and they are not to drink water from the canal stream. And then health facilities to diagnose and treat any person who has the disease as early as possible.
And doesn't like the water purification cycle?
It does, yes. But if you have the storage of water which is done improperly, and we have pipes that are broken and spillage of this, and water is not, rainwater is on the street for long days, breeding of mosquitoes will occur, and we cannot control it unless we have our systems, drainage systems, unless we supervise the areas where the breakage of seepage from this drainage and pipes and so on. We will have lots of mosquitoes breeding, and it will be a big problem nobody can control unless we start now and the knowledge is there. Take care, we have a threat of an outbreak. So the message is very clear. We have to invest in our environment, in our people's education, prevention of these diseases, so that we can develop better.
My main area of research is around the concept of local development, local communities, and how that plays a role in mitigating climate change and beginning to reverse the downward spiral which we find ourselves in with regards to biodiversity. So I'm a big proponent of the 400-meter imperative, in other words, the range around which we live, work, play, and generally live our lives.
What do you believe is the great climate change crisis facing the world today?
Well, probably the greatest crisis we face is the loss of biodiversity. The Stockholm Resilience Center identifies 9 areas of planetary concern in their planetary boundaries, and all of them are interrelated, and climate change plays a role in all of them. And certainly the loss of biodiversity, from soil to clean air to fresh water, are all factors associated with the bigger challenge of how we deal with carbon emissions and related greenhouse gas emissions, and the impact that has on our daily lives and our long-term prospects for human comfort.
How do you think we can correct this problem or protect ourselves from its dangers?
Well, as I say, I'm a big proponent of the notion of the 400-meter imperative. And in other words, I think we have to look at the places we live and find out how resilient are they, how diverse are they, how do they allow us to live, work, prosper intentionally, because we want to be there in local places, so that we reduce our dependence on private automotive transport, so that we are able to do far more things which allow for walkability and therefore better public health. And at the end of the day, all of these measures are means by which we're going to not only reduce our impact on things such as climate change, but at the same time, we're going to begin to accentuate the positive characteristics of the place we live, and therefore build more resilience into them, and more of those kind of biodiverse things, from soil improvement to greening of our own local environments.
Do you have a message aimed directly at delegates and policymakers?
Yes, I think those of us in the developed world have to, I would say we have to address 2 things in our behavior. One is our profligacy, in other words, how we waste and use far more than we need, but also our stupidity, in other words, our unwillingness to confront our own opportunities to live better lives, more comfortable lives, which I think are directly related to some of the challenges associated with climate change and the kinds of places in which we live.
Hi, I'm Grace Chu, and you're watching The Little Green Dot, a news show produced by 7 students from Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, for the United Nations Environmental Programme Youth Climate Reports.
Singapore, one of the 4 Asian tigers, an economic miracle 47 years in the making. But much has been sacrificed in the pursuit of economic excellence. More recently, World Wildlife Fund named Singapore as the country with the largest carbon footprint per capita in the Asia-Pacific region. In response to this, the National Environment Agency said the city-state has no choice but to rely on fossil fuels because its small size limits it from switching to alternative sources. But are there other ways to reduce our carbon footprint? The Little Green Dot finds out what's being done to help save the environment in the area of transport.
Hybrid, natural gas or electric? What makes these cars green and what is the way to go? I went out in search for the answer and to find out why the government should do more to encourage the use of green taxis.
With fuel prices steadily headed for the stratosphere, even the most hard-nosed taxi companies recognize that fossil fuels are not the way of the future. One of Singapore's newer taxi operators, Smart Taxis, has a fleet that runs on both compressed natural gas and petrol. The company says CNG is cheap and fairly abundant. It emits 90% less carbon monoxide into the ozone layer. Despite its prospects, CNG still has its fair share of problems. A tax of 16 cents per kilogram of CNG kicked in early this year, sending taxi drivers into a tailspin. Comparing 1 litre of CNG with 1 litre of petrol, drivers now have to pay $1.36 per litre of CNG compared to $1.43 per litre of petrol. To make matters worse, taxi driver David Chong tells us how CNG fueling stations are few and far between.
In year 2007, only Jurong Island, there's a only gas station in Singapore. Then year 2008, mainland got 2, and now maximum to 4 CNG stations in Singapore.
For other taxi drivers, CNG cars not only spell inconvenience but also less engine power.
At this moment, I prefer petrol. Petrol first thing more powerful. Second thing, you any station you can pump. But this one you have to all the way come here.
Mr. Lan says that the average waiting time for refueling can be about 15 minutes. Coupled with the travelling time to CNG stations, the time taken is enough to earn $8 to $12.
To help address the various problems that CNG taxis in Singapore are facing, Nanyang Technological University of Singapore and Technical University of Munich in Germany have partnered to design and build the world's first electric taxi. Here at the Research Techno Plaza, over 90 scientists and engineers are involved in this 5-year-long project.
But will the electric taxi charge on in Singapore? Dr. Stimming says it will, provided the people and government support it. The final product will be a taxi built and tested by the Tomb Create team, and a demonstrator vehicle will be released in 2014. This is Grace Chu in Singapore, reporting for the Youth Climate Report.
Within the context of the science of climate change, I mean, we saw incremental advancement in knowledge, but what took off was the political aspect of this issue, but it's understandable when you look back. It says, yeah, I mean, you know, climate change is not just physical science anymore. It's also a socioeconomic issue. It's very difficult to change our economic system. Right? We're going to need energy no matter what, and to switch over to green energy is going to take time. So we're going to keep emitting CO2, fossil fuel CO2 into the atmosphere. So what that means is that you need to put more and more emphasis on adaptation. You need to develop green energy, not just for climate change, but because we want to improve our environment. All the natural resource sectors will be hit hard. and the oceans as well. Change in acidities, change in temperature. You have changing, or you won't be able to catch the kind of fish you were catching for the last 30, 40 years, for example, and not in the same quantity anyways. That's why. And so food industry, so more on the resource sectors, I think. So I think we really have to pay attention to the resources, the natural resource sectors, because food is, no matter it comes from land or from oceans, we need food. You could study climate systems as a scientific discipline, and you could just focus on that, and heaven knows we need those people as well. But at the same time, I think we need to educate those climate scientists that whatever they're doing has a certain socioeconomic impact. And it's okay to become focused on one particular component of the climate system, because it's complicated in itself, and you could spend your entire career looking at one particular component of that, trying to understand the details of it. But at the same time, you have to be consciously aware of the interactions that particular component has with other components of the climate system, because they're all connected. And not to leave out the socioeconomic component of that.
Climate change is one symptom, but just one symptom only, of a much greater problem of human ecological dysfunction. The human system, the whole of the human enterprise, has already exceeded the carrying capacity of the planet for human beings. The work we do is in terms of something we call ecological footprint analysis. Ecological footprinting attempts to identify, to quantify the total area of ecosystems required by any specified population to produce all of its resources and to assimilate its important wastes. And what we have found is that the total human eco-footprint already exceeds the biocapacity of the planet. Carbon dioxide, one of the principal drivers of climate change, is the single largest waste output in all industrial economies. So we have a dilemma. The dilemma is this: we're already in excess of the global capacity to assimilate carbon dioxide, and yet 3 billion people live in more or less poverty. This means we can't possibly hope to raise those people to a decent standard of living using any existing technologies without completely destroying the capacity of the Earth system to sustain human beings. We can no longer operate as individuals or even as individual countries. It's not possible for any single person or any single city or any single country to become sustainable on its own. We're all on the same ship. The ship will either sink with all of us or float with all of us. This is a collective problem requiring collective solutions, and that means that we come together as a global community, forget the politics, in order to conserve life on Earth, or at least the prospects for civilized human existence. We need a global strategy in which we must reduce our carbon emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions by 80% before the middle to end of this century.
It has to do with climate change adaptation and responses of marginalized communities in urban areas to extreme weather events, water-related extreme weather events. And the idea of the project is to investigate how it is that people in low-income communities can develop ways of dealing with extreme weather events, whether it's droughts or floods in urban areas, and make that a viable response. How it is that people who have very close knowledge, very detailed knowledge of what happens in droughts or floods in urban areas, how those people who are experts really in what happens during climate change related events, how they can get that information to government officials and policymakers and make what they know, their expert knowledge, part of the policy process for dealing with climate change in those countries and those cities. The real experts in this world on climate change and on what needs to happen in climate change adaptation are the poor people, the vulnerable people, the people whose lives are affected by extreme weather events. And I believe our future depends on bringing those people's voices into the policy process.
Two of the pieces of work that we've been doing lately concern abrupt climate change. This is a kind of climate change where the whole climate system changes over a very large scale, and it's hard for the climate system to go back to the way it was before. And two of the types of abrupt climate change we've been investigating are changes in the big land ice sheets, Greenland and Antarctica, and also in deposits of methane on the ocean floor known as clathrates. And the discoveries that we've made in those areas suggest that abrupt climate change, due to major changes in land ice and due to release of methane from clathrates, may be much more severe than previously thought.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about your own research into and your personal contributions in your work here to kind of that project you had here at Berkeley Laboratory?
So I'm afraid most of my research is devoted to characterizing the problem, basically understanding what will happen if we continue on business as usual. So if we were to continue emitting carbon dioxide, what the climate would look like in the future. The work in my department and my group here is devoted to really understanding how the carbon cycle and how we're perturbing it, how those changes the carbon cycle interact with the rest of the physical climate system. And in some sense, we're sort of looking at a variety of forms of abrupt and extreme climate change that may come to pass this century if we don't alter our course of action.
My name is Mark Conte. I am a postgraduate student in Green Business Management at Seneca College in Toronto, and I will be interviewing Gary Johnson, Professor of Energy, Ecology, and Green Buildings.
The roles of the colleges are primarily in orthopraxis, it's right action. And so the research that we're involved in tends to be applied research. My focus has been more on how do we operationalize, how do we realize the changes that are required in the environment and in our actions in the environment. So particularly I've been focused on the role of buildings in the climate change picture, and more specifically the role of those who operate and manage buildings. The most current information that's coming back from the UN would seem to indicate that the building sector is indeed the biggest lever that we have to address the climate change issues. The people that are responsible for those buildings, those that have their hand on that lever, are the building operators and building managers. So most of the effort that we have in our area in the Center for the Built Environment is about the training of building operations and building management staff to more efficiently manage the environmental and energy impacts of the operation of those buildings. This is not just the students that come in for daytime programs, but it's programs that are delivered in a number of modalities in Canada, from the Pacific to the Atlantic and to the Arctic, and delivered in a variety of different climate zones to small groups that are actively involved in management and operation of buildings, all the way through to those who are looking to enter into that field coming out of either high school or of university.
Can you tell us what you feel is the greatest climate change crisis facing us today?
I think most people will tell you about rising sea levels and issues around urbanization and transportation particularly. They'll talk about India and China and the growth that's there. My take on it is that the greatest challenge we face is human behavior. That the requirement to change our behaviors is something that as a people we haven't been very good at. And the solution to the climate change issue goes beyond technology, but goes into the realm of assisting people to both be in awareness of the environmental and energy impacts of their decisions, and to use that awareness to move them to change. That, for me, is the greatest challenge. It's motivating the change in human behavior.
And on a final note, what then would be your key message that you would give for the delegates listening to this?
Matthew Kelly, someone I admire very well, wrote that you can't get through a no unless you have a bigger yes. Because changing our behaviors means saying no to a number of the ways that we have wasted energy and we have polluted our environment in the past, because that saying of no is difficult to get through. The greatest challenge is to discover what is the bigger yes across cultures and across countries. It's not just economics, it's not just altruism. There has to be a personal, connected yes that will be the root, the anchor that people can use to change their behaviors.
Hi, I'm Stephen Poon, graduating student of Green Business Management in Seneca College.
Hello, my name is Michael Wilson. I'm a second year, University of Victoria, Bachelor of Commerce student.
This is Sagar Adrial in Kathmandu for Youth Climate Report. I'm a high school student and president at Sanderson, Nepal.
My name is Afroz Lahsai and I'm a graduate from the Environmental Site Remediation Program at Seneca College.
My name is Victoria Wee and I'm the National Youth Coordinator for the We Canada Initiative.
My name is Mark Conte. I'm a postgraduate student in Green Business Management at Seneca College in Toronto.
Hi, I'm Grace Chu.
Hi, my name is Ayub Ansari, and I'm a student at Seneca College in the Environmental Site Remediation degree program.
I'm called Changwenina, the youth climate reporter from Cameroon.
My name is Shishir Handa, and I'm in the Department of Geography.
Christina Dilijakova, and I'm a master's student at York University. Give more focus to educating the public and industries about the dangers of climate change and environmental degradation.
My name is Oso. I'm a second year MSc student in the Geography department. There needs to be a more proactive stance on climate change from the youth. And then we need to realize that climate change is everyone's business. And it's only going to change if there's a fundamental change in human attitude towards the environment. We need to stop monetizing the environment and thinking of it as a cash bank and thinking of it as something that we need to survive, as well as something that was here before us. And we need to treat it with respect. And with that way, those fundamental attitudes will slowly trickle down into behavioral changes. And eventually, I think, through action of mainly the youth, we'll get to a point where we're satisfied with ourselves as humans.
أحيانا الواحد يعجب بأنه يشوف شباب بيحاولوا يسألوا عن مسائل يسهموا في حل هذه المشاكل على الأقل بالتعريض بها في الوقت الحاضر.